Hello everyone, I'm Tamara. I work at Saitel, which offers eVoting solutions, and do an industrial PhD at Polytechnical University of Catalonia. Today I would like to talk to you about coercion resistance and Cast's intended verifiability in eVoting, and how to achieve or not to achieve both those properties. First, let's look at a very typical eVoting scheme. In order to vote, first thing you have to do is to prove to the system who you are. Then your voting device creates a vote. It sends this vote to voting server, which verifies it before storing. Then when election period is over, we remove signatures and all other voter-related information from encrypted ballots. We anonymize ballots verifiably via mixnet, a homomorphic tally. Then we decrypt and count. Of course, this whole process is audited multiple times, and then and only then official results are announced. The biggest concern everyone has is the malicious voting device. What happens when it tries to encrypt something else? To battle this, we have a technique called Cast's intended verification. This is basically a way to challenge your voting device and make sure it behaved and indeed encrypted the voting option you wanted to. There are several methods to do so. The simplest one is called Castor Challenge, and this was proposed by Helios scheme, and every scheme that is derived from that one uses this too. Idea is that you can create many ballots and verify them using second voting device. And once you're reasonably convinced that voting device is doing the job correctly, you finally can cast a vote. Then you can have interactive Sigma proof where you directly challenge your voting device and receive some proof back, or other means of transferable proofs like written codes, QR codes, zero knowledge proofs of knowledge randomness, tracking numbers, other things. Also, it can be OR proof, where voting device prove to you that it either knows your secret or it generated the ballot in a correct way. Another threat everyone is concerned about is coercion. It's basically when someone tries to threaten you to vote in a specific way or offers a reward if you obey. And here is a bit more difficult because we don't have a common definition. Actually, it's not quite clear what coercer can do and in which phases and how long he can control voter. Which kind of proof he can demand, if it's going to be a video, monitoring the whole network, if it can ask you to obtain information you normally cannot get from the system, like randomness. More or less, you can divide the existing definitions in three forms, in three flavors. Strong coercion. This is the strongest form when a coercer can ask a voter not to vote, demand credentials, demand anything. Then we have strong received realness. This coercer cannot force voter not to vote or give away credentials. However, it can ask for a randomness that was used for encrypting the vote. Even if the system is not explicitly permit the extraction of this randomness and voter have to be creative and actually get it from the code somehow. A third flavor is passive coercion. This is when coercer gives instructions to the voter, like vote for a specific way or select challenges something in this way. And then he cannot vote over, voter have to interact with the system privately and give to the coercer everything that system gives to the voter. How those threats are connected? Well, actually it's two different adversaries that are aiming to make voters' life difficult. One is trying to change a vote for, say, A, another for C, but voter wants to vote for B. And we assume that cursor is not controlling voting device because otherwise it's practically voter impersonation. There is nothing that voter can do because every aspect of the voting procedure is controlled. And actually it takes tremendous amount of control over system and over voter to achieve this. So it's not something that's gonna happen with a large amount of water or even with a given water. It's just too extreme. However, at the same time, we cannot exclude the threat of a malicious voting device or coercion because both things can happen simultaneously, and we need to protect voter from both. And question is, can we have both even? Well, depends on which flavor of coercion you choose, because the strongest flavor requires you to give no information at all, and it means that you literally cannot convince voter in anything. Voter have to trust that voting device is honest. One of schemes that actually provides strong coercion resistance is called civitas. It allows voter to fake credentials, so fake credentials can be sold to or given away to cursor. And the scheme provides no cast as intended verification and has a very lengthy setup phase and quite expensive tally phase. Uh, what about disclosing randomness? Well, it turns out it's also, well, there is a scheme that tries to protect you against this threat. It's called Illinois RF, which stands for received free. And in this case, each vote is re-encrypted and only a re-encrypted version is published. So basically, you see that it's your vote because it's signed by you by re-randomizable signature, but you cannot make sure that it contains your intent because again, cast as intended verification is not provided and it cannot even be provided in general. You have to trust your voting device and randomization server to behave. However, passive coercion, which even though it does not protect against all possible threats, it allows to achieve cast as intended verification, which is why we focus on this coercion model. And as the other assumptions, we assume that first, well, forced abstention is not a problem. If voter is asked not to vote, he can use other voting channel, for example. This is common for a passive coercion model. Also, we assume that no secure channels between voter and election authorities exist. So the voter cannot receive some printed information or credentials via this magic channel. To make up for that, we allow voter to have a second device of his choosing that he's gonna use for verification or challenging the main voting device. It have to be trusted for privacy because it will do the task of cast as intended verification. Other than that, it can be any device. We don't permit multiple voting because even though it's the simplest form of coercion mitigation, it's technically illegal because it gives advantage to electronic voters. They can change their vote while others cannot, and while the only exception is Estonia. Then we want cast as intended verification to be provided despite cursor presence. Because we deal with coercion and cast as intended, we exclude code voting. It's systems where instead of encrypting your choice in a mobile phone, you receive a printed information and it already contains that if you want to vote for candidate A, type 123 and you send this code instead. We don't deal with it because technically this is not your voting device you have to challenge, it's the whole system, which makes it more complicated. Then we assume that privacy is not broken by tally, so proper anonymization technique is used. It's in practice homomorphic tally or mixing. And side note, we exclude Italian attack. Italian attack is when cursor is asking you to vote for a very, very unique combination. Most likely no one else will ever gonna choose this combination. And once votes are mixed, anonymized, and are ready to be tallied, well, mixed, anonymized, decrypted, and ready for final counting, Coercer obtains access to this information and looks for this specific vote. If he sees it, he knows you obeyed. Unfortunately, this is very hard attack to protect against. It works in any channel, including a traditional paper-based voting, and the only protection is really homomorphic tally, but it limits voting. Well, it limits voting schemes, and it limits significantly elections you can run. Not every single election can be turned in a homomorphic tally one. So we exclude it as well. Typically, it's never even considered by privacy as an attack, but it does exist. And why no secure channels? Typically, every single scheme published in eVoting assumes that secure channel exists. By secure channel, most likely they mean postal channel. Some printed information is sent to voter via mail. Unfortunately, it's not very realistic because mails can be easily intercepted or stolen or faked, or it's not really easy to ensure timely arrival for voters who live far away, let alone in different countries. Also, it raises interesting problem. If Coercer can demand this printed material to make sure you obey it, then how can you protect? Your only option is to be able to fake this material, right? To print a new card. However, if it's so easy, how do you know that material you received is actually a real one? So we think that this assumption is actually overrated, and it's more reasonable to assume that voter has access to a second device, say it's a computer and mobile phone or two mobile phones, and this verification application can help voter and challenge the voting device in a better way than in a better way the voter can. And yeah, drawback is that this verification application have to be trusted for privacy because it will actually see some information that might reveal the vote. But yet it's better than having secure channels and making sure that someone somehow delivers magically keys or printed material. So how does existing voting strategy deal with coercion? Actually, they don't. The Castaso challenge is, well, it's actually not a Casta's intended verification because technically speaking, cast vote is never checked. You always check votes before, but once you decided to cast a vote, that's it. This one goes unchecked. Interactive Sigma proof is very promising. However, here it's an honest verifier proof, simple one. So Coercer can make a voter to use a specific challenge, say hash over first move of a Sigma protocol, and in this case, zero knowledge is broken. Coercer can distinguish, and it's not gonna work. Transferable proofs like QR codes, zero knowledge proof of randomness knowledge, not gonna work as well because you basically can give them to a Coercer and he will know your vote for sure. Or proofs are more interesting. It's a designated verification and it's very promising. However, here his assumption is that voter knows its trapdoor key because if not, it's impossible to fake transcripts. And here is the thing: if Coercer can generate a voter secret key and never actually give it to him, then it's pretty hard to avoid this kind of coercion. Water has literally nothing to do. All information is stored by adversary. However, those two, interactive sigma proofs and OR proofs, are promising. And we would like to modify them to have both cast as intended and coercion resistance. But how many rounds do we need? Assume that both voting device and voter already know the plain text and generated cipher text, and now voting device have to convince the voter that everything was done correctly, that indeed ciphertext contains plain text voter selected, not something else. At the same time, it have to be fakeable later on, and only voter should be able to say that this transcript is real. It's obvious that one round is not enough, because in this case, voting device just sends a proof, and voter can practically, if voter is convinced that it was cast as intended, then cursor is convinced as well, because here we have no difference between voter and cursor. 2 rounds are not enough as well, because in this case it's just voter gives one challenge, voting device replies with a proof, and if cursor made a voter to do some specific challenge or do something in reaction to what proof or what commitment voting device provide, it will result either in a broken soundness or broken zero knowledge. So either you don't have cast as intended, or it's not coercion resistant. It's very similar to full versus honest verifier, which means we actually need at least 3 rounds. And one of simplest solutions is to commit to the challenge. It's basically a standard way to turn honest verifier zero knowledge into full zero knowledge. Voter have to commit to the challenge, send it to voting device starts a Sigma protocol. However, when it receives a challenge, it makes sure that it's the committed one, the one that voter committed to before. If it's okay, then it finalizes the proof and publishes it. It has some trade-offs. As we said, voter have to have a second device to make sure that this commitment can be computed, commitment to the challenge, I mean. Then voter is in charge of faking transcripts, so voter have to have some degree of understanding how it can be done, or some user-friendly way to do so. Then voting device and verification device, they have to communicate because this information, this commitment is quite lengthy, and probably voter will make mistakes while typing it. However, at the same time, both should not work together, otherwise whole challenge thing makes no sense. And yes, even though it's a simple solution, no such scheme exists, mostly because no one tries to achieve both properties at the same time and not rely on trusted channels as well. Second solution is to fix or proof, basically make sure that voter proofs that trapdoor key is known. For that, of course, we need verification application because here it's practically running Sigma protocol between voting verification app and voting device. The voter verification app chooses a trapdoor, computes a commitment, and starts a Sigma protocol to convince a voting device that it knows a trapdoor. If it's successful, then voting device generates or proof and publishes it, and now voter has the capability to fake transcripts. It has exactly the same trade-offs. Second device, voter has to have degree of understanding, and communication between voting device and voter's verification app is necessary. And yes, yet again, the solution is not implemented because most schemes rely on secure channels. As for the future work, we want to formalize coercion-resistant cast as intended notion. First, we want to formalize them separately, then combine. We would like to study a bit more which coercion attacks are in the scope to make sure that we correctly reflect all of them. Then we want to prove that provided solutions satisfy our definition formally, and maybe search for more solutions, but it seems that only those two generic are suitable. And then we want to see how we can modify existing schemes or remove their secure channel notion and make sure they still provide both properties. And yeah, we also have a plan to implement a scheme using lattice-based world and make sure it works and it provides cast as intended coercion resistance. Thank you for your time. If you have any questions, feel free to ask.